And we have the option to choose whether our world would disrupt in this way or not. And we do not have this capability in reality, so if our reality is rational, consistent and logical, it cannot support the existence of generalization in our reality. Not in our, we have to differentiate between our mental reality, like what we inside our minds, when in the external world which we sense. So this is like how it shows how it solves all these problems, and it shows also, it discusses Russell's paradox, and shows it is not applicable to the physical logic. The only thing that does exist is what I call dimensions. And dimensions are the existence of regularities, meaning existence of things that repeat. And the repetitions themselves, they are not things in themselves. It's their repeating tendencies of reality. Let's say, okay, now we skip to the next chapter, which is logical cosmology, and the first, I'm skipping to this chapter because this is where we find the first one. Existence. Existence is a dimension. Why? Existence, what is existence? What is it? Why do we have existence? Because there is a dimension of existence. But what is existence? Let's not ask now why we have the dimension of existence, because this is the second book. Existence is persistence. What existed before must exist. This is what exists in our reality. If we have matter, the matter persists. Maybe it changes, yes. But when it changes, it does not just disappear into nothingness. It simply transforms into something else, and this is different from failing to persist. This is just failing to persist the state of our world, but not the elements inside it. The elements themselves change, detach from each other, attach to each other, combine with each other, dissolve, but they persist through these transformations. Now, there are several implications of this. If this is existence, if existence is persistence, then only the present exists, because only the present persists. Everything else does not. So, past does not exist, future does not exist, and it is not, time is not a dimension like space, where we can travel back and forth. No. Contrary to all these ideas that we have been, even people actually saying we can time travel, not understanding what time is. Why do we exist? Where is the present? What is the metaphysical function of the present? Suggesting we can skip the present and go to the past. Well, it just showed that he did not try to explain why things exist, why things are as they are. And another thing is that because only the present exists, and if we're thinking about, let's say, the temporal duration of the existence of our reality, well, only the present exists at any point in time, and it's the only thing that exists. So time is endless, because it doesn't matter at what point you are. It's always the same. It's always the same dimension, the dimension of existence. And it doesn't matter at what point you are in time, you are still in the same metaphysical location, and that's the present. So time is endless. Time is infinite, both in the past and in the future. It's infinite. There is no beginning of the universe. There was none. There cannot be. If there is a beginning of the universe, it means our world is inconsistent. Not only that, the whole idea, the whole notion that there was a first cause. What is a cause? What is a cause? Cause is an idea. It's a generalization. It's something which you can. Can you put cause in a jar and show it to me? This is cause. Hello, cause. There is no cause, and there is no first cause. So that's like about if we were discussing mechanical determinism. The question shows we do not understand we do not understand that our perspective is inconsistent, is metaphysically inconsistent. Okay, this is the first dimension. There are many other things I'm discussing, but again, you are free to read or listen. The second dimension is the dimension of causality. Now, in the previous editions, I used to call it the dimension of dimensions, but this becomes pretty hard to catch up with. Dimension of dimensions and too many dimensions. So I call it dimension of causality because this is basically the same thing. But it's not just causality; it's the dimension of multidimensional causality. Meaning, if you have existing irregularities, one saying existence, another space, something must bind them together and say you have to elements in our reality must adhere to space and persistence of the present or dimension of existence at the same in parallel. This does not have to happen at all. There's no imperative, no logical imperative that demands it. It has to be another dimension. This dimension is something we simply fail to grasp. Like we're thinking of it like as if it's obvious. If we have several dimensions, then they all affect us. Why? Why do we have to exist in all of them like in a consistent fashion? Maybe we can be consistent with the dimension of existence, consistent with other dimensions, and not be the same thing. Something must bind it. Something must bind consistency of several dimensions, and it's something. This thing must exist in our reality. And I'm not talking about philosophy. I'm talking about something must bind them together. Otherwise, they would not be bound together. Simple as that. So this is the dimension of causality. The next is the dimension of space. Now, usually we think of the dimension of space in terms of like three dimensions, three spatial dimensions, like let's say width, height, depth. But this is our consciousness, which is dividing our reality. Like let's say when you shift your perspective, you're dividing your reality into three spatial dimensions. So, are you dividing space? Are you determining what are the spatial dimensions? Maybe for you, what about for me? So, if we are not in the same dimension, and we don't exist in the same dimension, so how can we share the same world? And if we do not share the same world, is that what you actually mean? Is that what you actually think? You think you're alone? Really? The other option is that the three spatial dimensions are not spatial at all. That our consciousness manages to divide one hosting dimension, meaning a dimension that can host elements side by side independently. This is actually space, not the three dimensions we think, but it is three-dimensional. It is still three-dimensional, being existing, hosting, and something binding. Hosting dimensions, hosting elements, and existing, persistence of existence, binding them together, causality, the trinity, which is space. Now, this may be strange, but if you think about it, let's say you have width. Width exists, persists to exist. Then you have the ability to host elements along width on height. Okay? And then you have something that causes a relation between them, and that's depth. Anyway, and actually we can in mathematics we can show that actually we can squeeze like three dimensions into one using all kinds of transformation equations. Never mind. What is important is that space can exist without time. Space is something else, and there are many other things. Space is not as trivial as it seems. And then there's motion. This is the fourth and last dimension in the logical cosmology before I shift to physics. The idea is that if things exist in our reality, if something happens in our reality, if our reality is changing, it must change everywhere. This is what it means, multi-dimensional causality, or the dimension of causality, what it causes. All elements must adhere to the same dimensions, or what I call the immanent dimensions. If they all exhibit this property all over our reality, and motion is one of them, change. And this is very problematic in physics, or in our concept of our reality. If everything in our reality has to change, has to move, this includes matter, and it includes everything about it, then it makes matter can no longer be solid. And that answers the question before: what are fundamental atomic particles? There are none, because they are all flows of causality. They are all manifestations of the dimension of motion, or manifesting the regularity in which the dimension of motion sustaining that everything must change all the time. And this kind of shakes our understanding of what matter is, because we're thinking that we're seeing particles, that we're seeing them move, think they are moving. We don't understand they are movement. That's what they are. The reason there is an equation between matter and energy is because they are the same thing. Not because, well, actually, this is not so groundbreaking. This is already accepted in physics, I think. So, this just explains why. Because it's a dimension. A dimension sustains it. Okay, now shifts to the logical physics, and this chapter actually confronts physics, like showing that what we have discussed so far is consistent with what we know about physics. By introducing another dimension, which I call the dimension of matter, but the dimension of matter is just like the dimension of space. It's not just one dimension. I just define it as one collection of dimensions, which I don't have the facility to measure, but this is basically what empirical sciences are testing on. It's the dimension of matter, checking what it is about, what are the laws it sustains? What are the laws of physics? What are the regularities? What are the dimensions that are compiling the dimension of matter? Now, there are some things that which are like, there are some things which we can tell. We cannot tell everything about it, because again, we have to. This is without empirical studies, we cannot know these dimensions. We cannot know the dimension of matter, its properties. But we can understand that because, let's say, all particles of the same element are of the same size, it means that this size is determined by a universal law. Also, we know that because if everything that, according to the physical logic, everything that exists are dimensions, and therefore, if all our dimensions are universal, if the laws of physics are universal, then they are not true to one specific particle. Every particle must be must have an additional dimension in it. Why? Because there's nothing else. Because if you're talking about consistency, and you're talking about the only thing that exists is existence, then you have nothing else. Otherwise, you're introducing something which you cannot explain what it is. This is what it means to build a consistent metaphysical theory, as opposed to just waving fingers and saying, giving names to particles and saying they exist because a collision made them. What made the particles before the collision? Another collision. There was like I heard something about like Stephen Hawking, and one time an old lady said, stood up and said, "I know you're lying, like, you know that the entire world is on the back of a turtle." And then he answered, "So what is beneath the turtle?" "Oh, you're just playing, you know there are turtles all the way down." This is exactly what empirical sciences are doing. This is the same argument. There are turtles all the way down. Okay, so so the same dimensions also must exist in not only in particles, which have to be additional dimensions, also in empty space. And this means that there's something existing in empty space. Something metaphysically, something exists in empty space, and I call it the intermatter flow. And I give an explanation to matter, which is not that different from that which already is provided, only it is based on the metaphysical theory already, and not just assumed by the equations, where each particle consists of two components of change. One are internal, another is external. Both are bound by the speed of causality, which meaning that I can explain why, there's an explanation why causality has fixed only one speed. Whether that's the speed of light, or the speed of neutrinos, or the speed of 3 times the speed of, it doesn't matter. There's one speed of causality. It doesn't matter what it is. In this book, I said it could be the speed of light, but lately we've discovered that it could be different, because apparently there may be particles which travel faster. This just means The speed of causality is faster than we thought. That's all. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, but it's not that important. What it does mean is that velocity is local, speed is local. You don't have relative velocity. You know the question: what happens when two particles move at let's say 80% the speed of causality, one toward the other? Speed of light, speed of causality depends if you believe the speed of light is the speed of causality. And there's so many arguments, but what this theory says that there isn't. And then it asked, what is the relative velocity of them? What the logical physics says is there is no relative velocity, because velocity is local. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there's a particle in the other side of the universe. How can there be this is another, like, and I'm showing you another inconsistency in physics. This discussion, I mean, like, you have one particle in one side of the universe and another particle in another side of the universe, and they are both at 80% the speed of causality, okay? And you are trying to say they impose some kind of relation between them? How fast can it move? I mean, they are so far away, let's say 1 billion light years. And now you are trying to say that there's something binding them, binding the speed, which travels at what speed exactly? The speed at 1 billion times the speed of causality? It's simply stupid. I mean, like, what they're saying. Maybe I didn't understand what they say, but if this is what they say, if they're talking about relative velocities, just they never thought. And this is what we are basing our technologies today, on this foundation. So I'm saying no, or logical physics say no, all velocities are local. I know this is kind of boring for anyone who's not dealing with physics, but if it continues to other things more interesting, maybe. Okay, now another thing is, for similar reasons, and with an additional explanation, it shows something which is completely contradicts our common sense or our current scientific paradigms, and that is that gravity does not spore from matter. There are no attraction forces. There cannot be attraction forces, because at what speed do we expect their attraction to happen? There is a concept of time-space bending and all that, but as I'm explaining the idea of time-space and the bending of it transforms space into an element space hosts. It's just shifting the inconsistency to another place. What another much more reasonable but not currently accepted is that empty space produces gravity by pushing. Empty space is pushing us down to the earth, not particles pulling us. And why and how does it happen? It's kind of something I would just give you a brief explanation. Shading. Matter shades the intermatter flow from space, causing well, we have to just read it. I won't bother. But what it does show, and actually is quite I've discovered lately that it's actually consistent with things that I did not know when I conceived this idea or deduced it, is that because it according to the logical physics, empty space produces gravity. Why does empty space affect matter? Well, this is the next chapter, never mind that. Now, what we have, science talks about black holes, saying that singularities, whatever. According to this explanation, There's nothing special about black holes. There's nothing there. That's the truth. There's nothing there. It's what happens in black holes. The repelling force from around a region of space which is empty equals the repelling force from the entire universe pressing the entire galaxy or the entire constellation of planets toward the black hole. So there's nothing there. Black holes, there is let's say a funnel of gravity, but this funnel is it's not what you think at all. If you want explanations, read. If you want to challenge it, fine, just read it and then challenge it. If you don't read it and you think I'm talking a lot of books, well, that's nice, but I'm not going to address it unless I know you understood why I said what I said. That's about everything I'm saying here. So if you think, oh, you can't say that because no, you first understand why I'm saying it, then argue. So again, from this we understand that every particle is a dimension. It's a dimension. Now that's the thing. That's the next chapter, life in the logical field. That's the thing. This is like the I don't know how to refer to it. This is like the biggest difference, the biggest delta this theory gives. It's the dimension of life and what it means about our reality. See, according to this theory, each particle must be a dimension because it's not universal, but it's a local dimension. What it means is that each particle is not just matter. Each particle is matter does not exist in space. No. Particles are the dimensions. Particles are the space they occupy. They are not in the space they occupy. They define the space they occupy. And this is in itself, this is like, okay, this is just a different way of looking at it, but there's the catch. Physical randomness. This is the catch. Quantum physics is discussing it, giving it equations, probabilistic equations, saying how physical randomness behaves. They don't understand what they're talking about. Let me. I need to explain this because you think, oh, how do you know they don't understand what they're talking about? Well, first, they don't claim to understand it, but that's not it. The fact that physical randomness obeys probabilistic behaviors, it means it still obeys a regularity. It still obeys the laws of something. If it was truly inconsistent, it wouldn't have obeyed anything. Meaning, nothing would predict it. Nothing. Not even in estimation. And the thing is, the estimations are pretty good. It wouldn't be in a specific distribution. It wouldn't. If it was inconsistent, a specific distribution already reflects probabilistic distribution already reflects a law governing it. So what it means, if you think about our reality and we see that everything in our reality obeys the law, there are universal laws of physics. There are. Not only are there such laws, but we actually can manipulate nature in using these laws, and we have technology with which you're actually watching me now, based on the validity of these laws. So our reality is not inconsistent. And the fact we have something we cannot predict universally, combined with the fact that particles define the space in which they exist and not just exist in the space they occupy, means that each particle has within it defined space. The space it occupies defines it in a different way than any other particle. Every particle is different. Every particle is determined by the behaviors of particles are determined by local dimensions, which are, let's say, vertical to our world. I would say, I call them the contingent dimensions. These contingent dimensions and the manner they affect our reality is the new technology around the corner. You see, each particle already moves. It doesn't need energy to move. It moves because of the dimension of motion, and it moves in the way it's contingent, but according to its external conditions, meaning the intermatter flow, and its internal conditions, meaning these contingent dimensions. Therefore, if we could program these particles, simply particles, nothing more, we could make them move how we want them to move. If we could do that, if we found the technology to do that, and we wouldn't need fuel anymore, because the metaphysical essence of our reality would move them, because this is what it does already, and we know it. So this technology is like, it opens the door for many things, but most of all, it changes something about something which we did not yet understand till this day. And this book, this chapter, Life in Logical Field, answers, or at least maybe answers, maybe it's a load of bullshit and I don't know, but needs to be proven. This is life. All particles are equally alive. There is no dead matter. That's the thing. There is no miracle of life. There is no dead matter. What there is matter which we think is its behavior is chaotic. We don't understand. Chaotic behavior is exactly of the same metaphysical essence as that of matter, which we think is alive. Only that these particles, the living particles, sustain, I call it robust kinetic equilibriums, meaning changes which recur again and again and again, and that's why we notice they are alive and are not just like random particles. So life is not rare. That's the thing. It's not rare at all. It's not only is it not rare. I mean, yes, the patterns by which life emerges could be rare to some areas, but potentially in every corner of our universe there can be life. There is life. Metaphysically, there is life. What this means is we should not expect not to find aliens. We should expect to find them everywhere. But most of all, another thing is that we can actually expect to find them in empty space. And I don't know if this is actually true. And I don't know what it demands. Because, again, we're talking about things which have not yet been verified in any sense. But the possibilities are endless. And actually, like, It's possible. There are lots of theories, let's say, about our past, about the pyramids, and we don't see technology left, and we would see technology left. So if it was mechanical, if it was metal, and what we don't think about is, of course, we don't think about it because it doesn't cross our attention. But if what I'm saying is correct, and it doesn't have to be correct, but if it is, maybe someone already used this as a technology, meaning used life, what we call life, as technology, and therefore actually as actual devices, not as just like, genetics. No, actually taking dead particles and making them do what I want. Let's say taking me up to the air and whatever, forming a crane from sand. Maybe they have this capability, and the only reason we don't see any evidence of it is because it's died just like any other life form. I'm not saying this is what I believe. I'm saying it's a possibility. It changes everything. It changes everything about what we think our reality is, and this is just a byproduct of this attempt to understand what is true to our existence as consciousnesses. Must be true, just a side effect. There's also another problem about this. Once we understand that contingent dimensions, these contingent dimensions determine life, not physical properties, not chemical properties which are vertical to our reality. They don't exist physically, materialistically. We cannot measure them because they are in a different local dimensions. We are looking from a perspective of the universal dimension, the immanent dimensions. While these contingent, replaceable dimensions, local dimensions, they exist only in the region of space of the particles in which they affect. Particles which they affect. Nowhere else. So we will not have any universal way to measure their effect. And if they govern life, so how are we to study evolution? How are we to study the past if they actually affect our reality? I know this is a lot to comprehend, and now maybe thinking I'm delusional. Not maybe, I'm sure you think I'm delusional, but you have to just follow the logic and find the fact. This I know how crazy it sounds. Of course I know. But it makes sense. That's a scary shit. That's a scary thing about it. It makes sense. So we think we are like analyzing evolution according to materialistic evidence, while in actuality what actually governed evolution was not materialistic. So how can we ever explain evolution? This is a problem, because okay, fine, so we explain all this. We have the idea is that delta theory begins with the metaphysical foundation, the physical logic, and then builds up until we find consciousness and self-awareness and all that. Still, we have to explain it. So the problem is that if indeed we cannot determine what exactly, how evolution transpired exactly, then the whole discussion is kind of pointless, because we can just say contingent dimensions are spontaneously created humans, the end. Yes, we can do that, but we can do better, and this is what this chapter does, this and the next one. it showed how a particle sustaining kinetic equilibrium transforms into cellular life forms, and the next chapter goes up to our brain and consciousness. But first you have to understand, like, again, this is we cannot verify it. I call the reason why we cannot verify it, I call it John Doe supernova, or JDS. We're talking about contingent dimensions, local dimensions, which nothing can track. Things of universal proportions can change, can occur without any universal reason. So we cannot track the past with anything. It's possible. Because it's possible, it's problematic. But even so, still, we have to think about it in another sense. It's not enough for something to happen one time. It has to be able to persist, to exist, to be self-sustainable. When talking about life, if life emerges in one way which is beneficial, it has to continue on doing it, reproducing enough so that it won't just disappear. So it has to be a much more robust change, and this kind of like tones down the effects of JDS on when thinking about evolution. Although at any point we can say we evolved into humans because it happened without reason, without any universal reason. Not without reason, without a universal reason. So there is the problem, like, let's say about when we're thinking about evolution, we're saying we had cells and then we evolved. What about cells? You know how far cells are from what we call dead matter, which is not dead, but let's say from just a few particles moving in space? There's so much organization there, so much things which had to evolve. How could they evolve? How could they come to be? They can't just pour out of nothing. There's nothing. It's a process. It shows. It has like cells. They have internal order. All this thing cannot just spontaneously happen. Has to. I mean, it can, but again, oh yes, it can, but it doesn't. It's not reasonable. What is more reasonable is a kind of like transformation from one particle which sustains this kinetic equilibrium to something which potentially could grow a skin, and then after growing a skin, begin self-organization within these cells until they emerge into what we know today as contemporary cellular life forms. And this chapter describes this process. But another thing it shows is that if you accept this, and I know this is a lot to accept, I know, and I'm sure you're already against the idea, but if we accept it, and if you understand the arguments I'm putting, maybe you would see my point of view, my perspective. Maybe you would understand why it's compelling. Maybe. Then it means something about something which we think is so important, saying something else about it. Our DNA. We think our DNA defines us. But if life is determined by contingent dimension, it doesn't matter what is in the DNA. It doesn't matter the chemical composition. What matters are the local dimensions which exist per particle. And I also explain what entire life form, all the particles, it's possible they are all sustain the same behavior, only take different role in the global plants, such as ants, for example. Ants are similar in that sense that they all, each ant does something different, but they all obey the same general algorithm, let's say. About that, if you're thinking about particles, then each particle, when we're thinking about these local dimensions, this is both programmable and consistent. Each particle is a state transition machine, just like a computer. But its computational complexity is potentially infinite. And this is something we do not have today, and it's in each particle. It's also a data storage. Each particle is a data storage of infinite size. We don't need clouds anymore. If this is correct, we can just put a particle in our pocket. That's all the information we'll ever need. Maybe. Again. So, this self-organization I was talking about, this happens in many ways. It happens within cells. It happens between cells. It happens between animal communities. The idea is that when we evolve, when something becomes successful, it doesn't mean it's perfect. It's far from perfect. Life is not perfect. On the contrary, it's completely not perfect, and because of that we can evolve. Because everything happens by chance. By chance it occurs that one thing is more beneficial, but we can perfect it. We can tune it to be perfect. Not we. Evolution can tune it to be better. This is why we can evolve. But this suggests something about reproduction through fertilization, or what we call sex. According to, if we think about our idea about what it is, it's not to reproduce. Our body reproduces all the time. The idea behind sex and behind gender and behind is evolution. That's why. That is the reason why we need to we need all this mess. It's because we need to evolve. This is going against all racial theories. Not such a big deal, but just explaining it. Then we have the human brain, or brain, shows how, gives an explanation how the nervous system evolved and why it evolved to become a brain. And apparently the only conceivable reason why it evolved is as a drainage system. There's an argument, a very large argument explaining why it is like that. A drainage system of contingent dimensions. Why? What it means? Read. This is why animals evolved to have a brain. Because you have to understand, nothing in evolution happens because, okay, we'll do this, we'll take like 100 years of evolution and then we'll have something beneficial. It doesn't work like that. Evolution goes, every change is beneficial. No change occurs because in 10 generations it will. It's not like a loan in a bank or investment that you after several years you collect. This is not how evolution goes. So everything in evolution has to occur because at every point it's more beneficial than previous generations. It also shows that, let's say, sleep. Why do we sleep? Well, it shows actually quite obvious. if we think about it, if we think that our brain can do whatever it can do while during wakefulness because it has to process information. If the brain wants to do some kind of optimization that requires more resources, it needs to put us to sleep so that the resources will be free, so that we won't be accessing, processing data, sensory data. Simple as that. This is why we sleep. This is just anecdotes again. And it's already very long, right? Also, it shows then it discusses our ability to generalize. This is what made us self-aware, and an additional metaphysical enabler, which I call the dimension of consciousness. And the dimension of consciousness is kind of similar to the dimension of space, with one difference. The dimension of consciousness can host elements as occurrences of itself. Why? Read. What it means is that, unlike in space, where two elements are not space in its entirety, and are separated, in our consciousness they exist as one recurrence of the space they occupy. This causes the reason. This is the main reason why we cannot. This is why we can perceive ourselves, because we sense the existence of the dimension of consciousness. This is our self-awareness. This is how we answer the completist criterion. More specifically, I will not answer that. Read. But this does explain another thing, and that is that why things can exist in our minds and not in the external world is because the external world hosts elements in a different way than we do in our mind, metaphysically different, and that's why they cannot exist in the external world, because they simply do require different metaphysical qualities. And it also explains why we cannot create artificial intelligence, because in our consciousness, in our minds, sensations, which are, let's say, contingent, not let's say, according to this theory, sensations are contingent dimensions put together. Put together within the dimension of consciousness, which can be potentially of an infinite complexity, contingent dimensional complexity. Computers cannot be this. They have a limitation of the amount of data they can process, while we do not have such a limitation. Computers manipulate universal laws of physics, while we manipulate a different kind of space, dimension of consciousness. We are so different that the very idea of trying to, if we think about metaphysics, the very idea of even thinking of an equality between a machine and our consciousness, it simply shows we are kind of immature in a way. The thought, it's childish. It shows lack of thought. Simply as a lack of thought about metaphysics. Again, I could be wrong, sure, but again, read the arguments and then think if it's really wrong, or if what you thought before was simply lacking in several manners. Whatever you will decide, you will decide. The thing is that our ability to generalize has of course, it has it offers evolutionary superiority, because by using generalization, we can apply the same behaviors we learn on different types of inputs. But on the other hand, if you think about, let's say, our self-awareness, our consciousness, we think if it's something special, well, apparently, because we all use the same dimension, it's not really ours. Self-awareness is not ours. It's universal. The reason we do not share consciousnesses is because the contents, the contingent dimensional contents of our self-awareness is different. And there's another difference also. Dimension of consciousness. Our consciousness does not have to persist to exist in time. It's a completely different world. It's not the external world. We do not exist in the external world. We are in a different one. We are within the dimension of consciousness. It's a completely different world than the external world. And it's not such a big deal. A lot of people have understood this already, but this is a different perspective over this idea. Now, the thing is, we have to understand something about sensations, the completest criterion and all that. Well, I'm not going to explain it, again, read, but the idea is that we have to understand something. For us, let's say, I said before, an apple. For us, an apple is not just the word apple. When you read it, immediately we have also the shape of an apple, the color of an apple, the taste of an apple, our experience from an apple, from apples, an Apple computer, and all these come together because this is exactly what the dimension of consciousness allows. This is what generalizations allow. The sense of experiencing an apple is the same as reading it. It's the same experience because it brings into our consciousness the same element, the same memory. This is something that computers simply do not do. They don't. There's a complete difference between the representation we see and the data it stores and the meaning. Meaning does not exist in computers. And well, for us, reading a word is the symbols that represent the word apple are the same as the experience of tasting it. It's the same shit. We are completely off with artificial intelligence, and it's not that surprising that artificial intelligence has achieved so little progress.